So doing more armor studies today. So gonna get started with just, sketch. Not really much to say about what I'm doing here, except being very loose. Because I will be doing a lot of paint overs instead of cleaning up the lines too much. I'll be cleaning up the lines a bit, definitely, but not as much as I normally would. And a special thanks to Jack for this wonderful photo reference of gripping food with force while in armor. I still have no idea what the context of this is, but I love it a lot, and you'll see what I mean in a bit. Important thing to remember is negative space is very important. When you're doing complex things, it can be as important to look at the space between the shapes than the shapes themselves. So for example, with this little neck piece here, there's this sort of shape. And then for me to determine exactly where I need to put the pauldron, there is this shape that I know is about as wide as that one right there. And it goes then about here, almost equilateral triangle. That is where that pauldron lies. Now, in addition to using, negative space and other objects to measure each other, you really can save a lot of time by working out a sketch beforehand, before I got into here and started to do the details of the armor pieces. Realistically, I should have sketched out all the proportions immediately. Very interesting shaped pauldrons. There's this dip in the middle. I'm not sure if that's a dent. The dip's, right there. So it starts about here and then goes down to that. I don't think it's a dent. I think that's pretty intentional because I don't really see any folding on the edges very much. Well, I don't know. Either way, it's very interesting. Makes the light bend in some pretty cool ways. And once again, this is an armor study. I will be doing, in particular, some of the cloth. But I don't think I'll be doing a full painting of the face. I might. It's a pretty fun expression. Yeah, I definitely actually do want to do in the face, because the face really shows, actually, a lot of the reflected light. It's a very good example of that. So, now the face is often also a very good place to point out things like subsurface scattering, and I'm not entirely sure if this particular reference will be a good use of that. If not, I'll make a video on it on its own. But regardless, you should probably practice faces more. It doesn't matter how much, you should do it more. This is going to be the hard part. There's nothing really for me to measure this against, not easily. And that, for example, is precisely where sketching it out beforehand really would have helped. Hand is definitely way too big, but that's fine because I can just do that. The joys of digital art as a medium. There's a lot of reasons why I use it, and being able to transform things like that is exactly why. Especially with my issues with aphantasia, not being able to picture things well, being able to modify them so easily after the fact without having to use extra materials is an absolute godsend. God, this looks so... This is definitely not correct. It's very difficult to tell exactly what I goofed up here with. Yeah, I'm gonna have to... No, I don't want to resize that. I want to resize this. Alright, Photoshop. Yeah, I know. It's a big file. There we go. Oh, come on. Get back here. There we go. Yeah, multiple monitors are very nice, but sometimes having the reference just on the page helps quite a bit more. It also means that, as I mentioned, I believe a little bit later, you can color pick from it, and that will save you a ton of time setting up your palette. It doesn't even have to be your reference, just something like it. Just grab colors, get them on the page beforehand. You'll thank yourself later. Okay, so that's what it was. Or at least a bit of it. It's the bed angle on that gauntlet. And there it is, just spending a little bit of time refining the details on that face. I'll be coming back to that later, I'm sure. And I definitely want to do a number of videos on just faces themselves. There's definitely far too much to talk about instead of just, as an aside on a different study. Okay. So that's a good enough start, honestly, for the lines. Might clean them a little bit more, but I think I'm good for that. So now I'm going to do a little bit of examining. So we've got some mostly green light. Coming from this side over here. Even from here, just kind of surrounding. Then there is blue light coming from this side. And then there's a little bit of, I'm gonna guess it's a dirt path of some sort. But you can see reflected on the pauldron. And a little bit on the sleeves there. That sort of color. Okay. Although actually, let's group these up. Besides that, okay. And then I want to that, and then mask. There we go. So that way, I can just paint like that and not worry about it too much. So I don't have to worry about that anymore because I've got that now. And actually, I want to make this black. Now, setting up masks on groups like that have more of a use than just as a frame, like I did there. I'll also use it for figures to separate them for the rest of the image, and on more detailed pieces, I'll even go and set up groups for each separate material and mask them on their own, so I can do all the details and lighting them freely without interfering with the other parts of the image. See how this looks. It's going to be drawing the light in on top of that, so it doesn't really matter. Let's just have a base to work off of. It's about what it's like in the shadows, like right there. So let's actually see. Open that up. Yeah, actually it was pretty close there. So let's just bring that up a little bit and saturate that a little bit. There we go. And then, of course, last flat we throw in here. The orange that is being gripped with force. So actually, this is actually a little bit brighter on the parts of the metal. Actually, yeah, I wanted to drop in the shadows here first. This is kind of more of how I'm determining the real edges and lines of these. This is where these shadows drop. I'd normally be a lot more picky about my line art than this, but it's being a study, it's a bit of a speed paint. It's much easier to just paint over and adjust that afterwards than it would be to refine something that I'm already probably going to ignore, all odds. This is kind of reshaping things as I go, the overpainting. And again, for a full painting, if I'm going to be doing the whole piece, I'm probably spending quite a bit more time cleaning things up beforehand, so I'm less, making decisions in the overpainting part. Ideally, I'd have a lot more things set up, like basic shadows. Actually, let's start dropping in. A palette. Come on. Right here. That. Here we go. It's a start. So this is how you get your stuff to start looking really realistic. It's reflected light. It's something that people forget pretty consistently with the work stuff. They go, it's like, okay, there's the light coming from the sun or the lamps, and it's just like, okay. And they do the thing that like every art tutorial tells you, which is like, the brighter things get warmer and the darker things get cooler. And that's sort of true a lot of the time. Mostly because essentially the last visible light we see, for the most part, is blue light. So as things get darker, things seem blue because it's the only color that's really reaching your eyes. Which is why, for example, red objects get desaturated very quickly as light gets lower. What it meant to say there was that you don't need to just account for the warmer lights and the cooler shadows, but you also need to account for the objects nearby that the light is bouncing off of. You may have something like the yellow dirt that is bouncing a warm color into your shadows, even if it's cool otherwise. Actually, let's see, how well did I guess the color? So right there, and then this. Okay, quite a bit brighter. Let's drop that in, not there. There. Yeah, see, that's those things. I tend towards darker desaturated colors, just kind of out of habit, but it's often not the reality. I'm kind of doing this gauntlet first because it kind of has the full range of reflections. Or at least most of it, besides that little bit in the corner there. And once I'm done with that, I should be able to color pick from that gauntlet pretty easy and start filling in the rest of that metal. Even with reflections, you generally, unless it's a perfect mirror, you don't want to pull directly from the background, because as things are bouncing around and reflecting, it's losing a bit of the light, a bit of that information. So it's never going to be precisely the color before it bounces. And it's just a little bit yellow here. It's even a little more yellow than that. There we go. Let me actually. Yeah. Oh, I'm a goofball. Let's just cut that. Drop that in there. Accidentally just doing some overpainting on the the layer above it. Now, as you may have noticed from a couple of these sidebars, I decided with these gaps that I cut out of the mostly dead air where I do time lapses, I talk a little bit more about things that I missed during this sort of a stream of consciousness thing. And one of those is kind of the point of why I'm doing a lot of these studies. I mentioned it a little bit about how I tend towards dark and desaturated colors. It's a lot of studies is breaking habits. It's trusting what you're seeing rather than what you think something should look like. Happens a lot during this with the metals, where I'll go in with a color and realize, no, that reflection really is just that shiny. And until you trust your eyes more than your brain, you'll keep making those mistakes. So let's see, how close was I on this? So there's that. Oh wow, yeah, that's maxed out. Let me actually drop some of that in there then. If you have a reference photo, it's absolutely not a bad idea to just start grabbing, colors and stuff from that. Yeah, and just dropping those in there, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. as we're approaching the end of this, and we got this nice long bit of time lapse for me to talk in, I want to do a couple things. First, I wanted to thank some people. First, Jack, for letting me use the reference image for this video. It's a really good one. I don't know why he's crushing the orange, but that's fine. I'll figure it out someday. I also wanted to thank my patrons, Tamlin, Magus, and Cosmic Alchemy, for their support. It really means a lot to me, especially right now. Now, on to my other point. The reason why this particular bit of time-lapse got so long was because I didn't take breaks when I should have. I went on straight, until the very end of this, when I tend to work best, with about a 30-minute break, 30 minutes of working and then a 15-minute break. And I definitely recommend you try to find a balance for that yourself. You'll get far more done if you properly pace yourself and stretch and drink water when you notice yourself not focusing quite as hard as you used to and just mindlessly working on details. You'll make way more mistakes than otherwise and ultimately get less done, even if you're spending more time working. Another important thing to remember when you're doing this is you don't have to be exact with things. Understanding the relationships between colors and knowing that, for example, with a background like this, you've got this bright, bright, bright yellow. But that's not what shows up on the reflection. On the reflection, that same point of what it's reflecting is muted like that. And knowing how that works is much more important than knowing the precise colors. Because then you can fudge it for Vermont. So, for example, if there was a flower, for example, that's, this bright, bright, bright orange. When it moves to that, knowing how that works, let's say it would move a little bit closer to blue, because of the armor is kind of a bluish gray, so that's going to affect it. Desaturate a bit, and then lower, actually desaturate quite a bit. So that reflection will probably be something like that. That's part of what this is. This is just getting used to it. How things work. Honestly, not too sure what to talk about in this last one. Kind of went over it in the time-lapse before this. But instead, I think I'll talk about the next things I'm working on. It's going to be, of course, the next part of this one. I still have a dozen other armor studies that I could do. Whether or not I'll make videos on them, those will be coming out on the Patreon shortly. I want to make new rewards, stickers, and posters for the tiers for this new year. And I'll finally be getting around to finishing up and doing the time-lapse of the elf art. That's part of why I was doing this. I wanted to get better for that piece. Okay. I think I'm going to call it here for the first part. This was pretty fun. Had a good time. Some little nuts and bolts and little extra details I'm going to add in. Probably do that in the next episode. Might do it between. Next, I'm probably going to focus on the face. Talking about that, skin, and the reflections in general. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.